All right, Bitwig Studio version 1.2. We're going to talk about some of the new features and improvements that I've at least come across. I'm sure that there are many more, and anything that you discover that I'm skipping over, feel free to leave in the comments section. I'd also only ask that if you could be kind enough, if someone would be kind enough to actually timestamp the different things that we're going to go through here. I'm going to actually say number 1, number 2, etc. I'm kind of coming off of a cold, so my voice is gonna sound more nasally and obnoxious than usual, at least especially to me. So if someone would be nice enough to do that, it would be fantastic for everybody who is following along. And I always like to say that I'm gonna run through these things quickly, and then I go off on some crazy side tangent, and I'm sure that will probably happen at some point in this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. You'll notice right off the bat that the interface itself has changed. It's become a little bit slicker, a little bit sharper. If you have a HD Retina display, you'll definitely notice a difference because I'm pretty sure they optimized the program for that. Obviously, if you're watching this video, you can tell I do not have such a display, but even so, things pop out a little bit more, and I'd say that the improvements that they've made to the overall interface are good, and I really love the way the interface looked from the beginning. So it's only positives there. We can look at the different views and see some of the changes. So that's the most obvious thing. Don't really have to go over and say, oh, wow, they changed this shade by X amount. So that's just the obvious one. Everyone can tell that right off the bat if you're moving from 1.1 to 1.2. Number 1 that we're going to look at on the list is just within the package manager. You'll notice that I did not go out of my way to update or install anything after I made the update from 1.1 to 1.2. So you can look in here and see that almost everything has been updated here, which is fantastic. Some of these things I probably won't download, like device presets, and yeah, that's jumped a significant amount from 2 megabytes up to 16 megabytes. But also things like the classic drum machines, that's almost doubled in size. And I've noticed since working with Bitwig and using their built-in samples more and more that I'm not having to dig too much. I'm not having to go and find something to use, from my own collection, which is great. If you're brand new to making music, a lot of the sounds, they're really close to what you want. And if you know how to process sounds, you're not really going to need to go out and do any additional sample pack buying or anything like that. They, I guess, also maybe added a couple of new things in the partner collection, so you can check that out as well if you want. Just thought I would show that to you so you can see that they really have done a lot with the factory content that comes with the program. Number 2, it's a real biggie for me. It's something that's pretty subtle. It might have been around from the beginning, but it's keyboard commands. And then we will also be going into this, they call it the mappings browser panel, something that I think a lot of people really wanted. But before we go to that, I want to show you something that I discovered when just kind of exploring that I think is absolutely huge. And that's to go into the keyboard shortcuts here. And if you search for Q, you'll see that we can actually set keyboard commands to launch our arranger cue markers. Now, I'm not really a keyboard command person. I know that's weird. Everyone encourages you to do that. I've just always felt like I'm better with the mouse. But, if you look at these cue commands up here, cue markers, if I right click them, there's no way of me to map this to anything. And I've always wondered, like, if I'm working on a mix, for example, how can I quickly jump between my song if I'm working in the actual mix view without having to go back over and click and play and all of that. So the solution to that, which is so helpful, is to go in here and you can actually add in your own commands. So I could do like Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, just as an example. Click OK. And then if I'm working on a mix, I'd actually have a sheet of paper next to me that would say, like, okay, at cue marker 3, the bass comes in, cue marker 4, this is the chorus, cue marker 6, this is the bridge. And it really is quite useful because now from here I can just very quickly jump around in my track. And in this example, I just have 3 different drum loops, but you could see the power of that. I'm still hoping that at some point they create some kind of like floating window similar to like memory locations in Pro Tools. That's a really nice feature so that you don't have to keep jumping back and forth. So for me, that is huge. It might have been around from the beginning, but it's been something that's been saving me so much time already. Even just in like the 1 or 2 sessions that I've opened up inside of Bitwig Studio, I've been able to set that up pretty quickly and jump through things without having to continually go back and forth if I'm mixing in this view, which is what they encourage because it is called the mix view. All right, so the next thing we can look at here is the MIDI mappings browser panel, which is really very nifty. It's something that I'm sure everyone wanted from the beginning. It will remind you a lot of a particular program, but really it is so useful and so helpful and an easy way to manage all of the mappings that you set, whether from your computer keyboard or if you have some kind of MIDI controller plugged in. I have a MIDI controller plugged in. I don't really use it that often, but for the sake of example, I can show you how this will all work. So there's a difference between controller script and MIDI. Personally, I have no idea what that difference is, but I'm always just going to go into MIDI because that's what's safe and familiar to me. And I can just go in here, for example, and I could set that to the S key on my keyboard. You can see that it has a toggle solo, but all sorts of different options you could actually set up here from specifically like this channel. So if I wanted to change this to something like toggle arm, I could actually do that if I wanted to, but I'm just going to go back to toggle solo. That's what I want. I can close this down, and now you can see I could solo out that track. Everything else gets muted. Fantastic. I could also go in here and choose the actual fader itself and just turn a knob. Now what's great about this is that the knob that I'm turning is actually one of those continuous controllers. So if I want to try to set a limit value, it would be really difficult to do that in the past, albeit actually impossible. Now I can actually go in there and set this. So I can put the max out here at 0, which means now as I close this down, it stops at 0 for me, which is absolutely fantastic. All right, so get in there. You can really do a lot with this. You can set multiple things to the same controller, obviously. Like I could go in here and set this, and then I could actually, I guess, put the inverse in here maybe, so that if, for example, they were both at their default state, when I turn this, one will go up, the other will go down. You know, very cool, useful. And I could also set multiple things to the same key if I wanted to do that. So if that solos, maybe I also want this to solo at the same time. Okay, great. So that right there is number 2. As far as I can tell, our number 3 here is more of just a visual change. It's more of an aesthetic change than anything else. And that is the ability to go double size clip launcher slots if you want them here from the mix view. So the only real difference that I can tell is when you click on this, you get a small little waveform view. What I was thinking originally when they were adding this was that you'd get a much larger play button. And I could see an advantage to that because if you have a larger play button, if like, you know, you might have had one too many drinks and you're trying to play something live, you're like, why isn't this playing? You know, you're clicking, you can't find the play button. I thought maybe that was the reason for this. I'm not really sure what the reason was other than you do get this little display. You can single click it and it will pop up down here if you need to make any edits or pull up your inspector. So that is number 3. Views. Number 4 is the device inspector panel, I guess is what you'd call it. If you've worked in Bitwig Studio for any length of time, specifically a lot with like audio clips, you've become very familiar with working over here in the inspector panel. And it's important to, you know, distinguish the differences between something like the arranger clip inspector versus the audio event inspector, all things that, you know, I've already kind of probably beat to death in other videos, so we're not going to go over that now. But what's new is the device inspector. So if I go in here and grab some kind of effect or device, let's just grab like the chorus, you can see that if I click on the chorus, we get this new device inspector view. And believe it or not, you're thinking off the top of your head like, oh, this is just a total cop-out of the little modulation window that you get in here, the macro control knobs. But actually, I think that this is a lot more streamlined and a lot quicker for a couple of reasons. One is if you're going back and forth, making adjustments in the like a Ranger clip or audio event inspector, and then you're going and making changes to your devices, it makes sense to leave the inspector open and you can do everything from over here as opposed to having to open this up and then double click here, double click there. And there's some other benefits to this as well. For example, if I go in here and I start adjusting some things, I'm actually going to pull this down. We'll just throw this out a couple different places. We'll increase the rate, the high cut, whatever. Pull time down. All right, if I do that, and now we're playing this back. Godavari, Godavari. We can hear the changes, but some other things you can do from here is you could actually switch this into a bipolar mode, double click it to then reset it. Not that useful in our case, so I'm going to pull that back. But what you can do is if you're listening and you're like, wow, going to that wide control just sounds terrible. You can hear the little click. Maybe that's not something that I want to control with a macro knob. I can easily go in here and just delete it as opposed to having to right click and clear automation. It's a lot more streamlined from this view. We can also adjust how far things are going. So if I put this out to full, we can see the range that it's taking, and maybe I realize, oh, in hindsight, I actually maybe want the time to go up here. All right, so I could set that like so, and then I'd be able to, Godavari, while I'm playing this, actually lock in what I want. Godavari, Godavari, Godavari. So I can find kind of my, in the pocket, so to speak. I know that's kind of like a really cliche phrase to use now, but I can find my perfect setting and really set it from this over here as opposed to having to try to just like eyeball it and get it just right. So I think this is a huge improvement. The other thing that you'll see are we have these other like little settings here. I've never had this pop up for anything, but the third one over will be very useful for a couple of reasons. If I go to the wet effects and I drop something in here, like, doesn't really matter, so it's just an example, like the frequency shifter. All right, we get a new device inspector specific to the frequency shifter. So if I'm going to add something, like, let's just, we'll just set it to the mix for now. And then, make some changes here. Godavari, 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 Godavari. Okay, perfect. So right now, if I go in here, we can see that with our mix macro 1, or with macro 1 inside of the frequency shifter, we are controlling the mix. Maybe we'll call it something different, like, let's see. I'm going to change the name here to just like freak so that we can see that there. If I then go back to my chorus and I decide to set like a macro, it could be either macro 1 or macro 2. We're just going to call this crazy chorus. If I set something up within the chorus, because remember this is being nested inside of the chorus, we'll just set it to the range, seem to do something. Shift obviously does something. Godavari. If I go back into the frequency shifter, I can then actually see that, oh, okay, crazy chorus, the outside here, is controlling a couple of additional parameters, and I can actually go in here and adjust the ranges on those from either this page, or if I was into the chorus, I could actually do it from here as well. So really, really cool, pretty handy feature, especially when you start like nesting macros within macros within macros. We could obviously like go to the front here and put an effects chain, drop that in. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of that, but you can check it out and see just how much you can do from this new device inspector panel. It really is quite powerful. It's like something small, but it can do a lot for you. You can also right click from here and map these to controllers, just to, save you an extra step there as well. All right, on to number 5. This is the one that everybody was asking for from the very beginning. The ability to group tracks. Now, it's important to remember that since the beginning of Bitwig Studio, you could always do stem processing. Like I could take audio 1 and I could route it instead of to the master. I could route this into audio 3. I could take audio 2. I could route that into audio 3. And then if essentially what's happening is we're getting sort of like a mix bus from audio 1 and 2 all summing together at audio 3, and we could process them together. So that's always been possible. But the thing that hasn't always been possible is space saving, right? Like if you are working on a pop arrangement and you have 100 tracks or something, we'll just add a few more here for the sake of example. You know, in a pop song, you'll easily have like 100 tracks sometimes. Then trying to manage and find where everything is can be quite a headache because it was impossible to just fold down specific clips. Granted, we can go and we can make the view smaller, but that doesn't really change anything because I can't expand any of these out one at a time. And from the mix view, it's even more of a headache trying to go through and find what you're looking for. So we now have group tracks, which give us the ability to process on that group level without having to send into a new like auxiliary or bus track. So that's a plus. And then we also get, for me, the biggest plus of all is the space saving. So what I would do is let's pretend like these 12 are all something. These next few are all something. We'll name this out just for the sake of it in a minute. These are all something. And then to the end, these are all a group. All right. So I could go and I could either do it from this view, I'll do it from the other view. I could take all of these guys together and either hit Command G or right click and group tracks, close that group down, go into this second offering here. Command G, close them down. Command G, close them down. And I'm assuming that if you're that interested in group tracks, you already know what you want to do with them for the most part. But just to give you one example, we could say like, okay, group 1, this is actually our drums. This is our percussion. These are our instruments, or we'll just say they're synths. And then this is all of the vocals and background vocals and all of that fun stuff. And then you realize, like, you know, I actually want to do some processing with both the drums and percussion together. So we'll just go through and do like one just silly example here with anything that we can pull up. Like, let's say that this first guy here is actually the kick drum. Okay, and on the kick drum, I want to have a comb filter. So this is specific to just the kick drum. On the drums as a whole, so all of these different tracks, all right, I want to have the bit 8, okay? So you can see the bit 8 goes to that level. But now what I want to do is I want to process something with the drums and percussion together. I could take the two of these, I could group them now, and now what I would actually do is I'm going to change the color on that. I'm going to change this to drums, and I'm going to call this main, since I know that it's drum parts and this percussion. And then I could go to the drum level and I could put like a compressor on that or whatever. And then if I want to get really fancy and really crazy, I could actually say, I don't want to do any of my processing on the master bus. I want to just have one sort of like full mix all on one group track. I could go in here, I could take all of these guys and I could group them together like so. Again, I'm going to change the color of that. And then this would really, for all intent and purposes, be the master. And then on the master, I could actually process it with something if I wanted to do so. The other cool thing about this is if you tab over to your other view, you'll actually notice that the shading becomes like darker and darker as you open these up. All right, so you can see how it's getting darker. If I am to go in after this level and create an additional group, it will go back to being super light colored again. So really neat, really cool feature, a good way of organizing everything that you're doing. And you can also specifically go in here to the project and choose the group you want. So if I just want to see the main drums, it will show me all of the main drums and just the main drums. And then I can back that out again if I need to, like so, all the way back to the project view. All right, so there you have it, group tracks. On to number 6, templates. I will be honest, I am not the person to talk to about templates. I'm not a big fan of that whole idea, but I understand their value and use to a lot of people. And in Bitwig, you could always like save a template, but let's say you've then worked on a project or a few different projects and it's no longer showing up on like your recently opened files. So it could take you an additional minute or 2 minutes to find where you saved that template and opened it up. Now you can actually start new projects from a template either you save or a template that they have available for you. One thing I didn't mention when we were talking about like the MIDI mappings and this browser panel is that it will save along with your project, and also it will save along with your templates. So let's say, for example, this would be a case where I might have a template. I'm working on an album or I'm working on an EP for somebody, and I want there to be some kind of solidarity between the tracks. So when mixing all of the tracks, I'm going to use the same sort of like channel strip or the same kind of plugin combination amongst all the tracks. So in that case, what I would probably do is I'd have an audio track because I've bounced everything to audio. I'm going to bring everything in individually, and I'd go in here and I would say like, okay, let's just go to maybe a plugin because that would be a better example. I'll have this as my compressor, and I'll have this is my EQ. Okay, so this is the way I might have it set up, for example. And actually, I would probably do it the other way. It depends, it all depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that. So I'm going to turn this project on just so I can set this up. So what I would actually do is I would go in here and I would probably, option A, disable these guys so that if I already knew that I'm going to have at least 10 tracks, I could go ahead and set this up by duplicating this first one 10 times, and I'd at least have all of these guys in here, and you'll see that they'll load in eventually, but I'm not going to have like this massive CPU spike when I actually open up the project and start to bring in those audio clips that have been bounced. And I would do the same thing with like my effects. Like if I knew that throughout the album I'm going to use the same reverb, I would drop that reverb plugin on here, or even just the built-in reverb, but I'd probably go ahead and start by like disabling it. Maybe I know I want to have the reverb. Come on, buddy. Maybe I'd want to have the reverb followed by like a filter, or, since it's closer, the filter like this. And I know I'm going to probably want to do something along these lines. Just some of that quick little like tidy work to set things up in advance. And I would go in here again and I'd probably just completely disable them, deactivate them until I need to use them. Same thing with the master channel, like the master bus especially. If I know that I am doing some kind of master bus processing and I've worked on one track and I've done that mix for a week, I've gone off and done something else for a while, I might forget what exactly it was I had on the master. And so setting that up in the template to begin with, quite useful, so you don't have to go backtrack, figure out what it was, etc. And if you have a particular setting you like, you can even set it up with that setting and then go in and do some like additional tweaking. So let's say we want this on our master channel here. All right, I would probably go in here. I guess there's no presets for this particular program, but if there was, that would be quite useful. There's not, so it's not going to be the best example in the world. But let's say that this is the setting that I really like. Okay, I'd go in there and I'd probably, again, disable it until I actually needed to go in and turn it on. And then I would go in and, just so I can show you this as an example, we'll set up one sort of like MIDI control here, or keyboard command. Perfect. Whoop, sorry about that. All right, so I have that set up. Now all I have to do is go in here, File, Save as Template. We'll call it Mixing. And then I'll go ahead and just say OK. And now when I want to start a new project, I could go New from Template. I could go into the new one that's just been created, click OK. And you'll notice that if I turn this back on, no CPU spike at all because all of these are not active, and it has gone ahead and saved over that keyboard command. So you can use templates for all sorts of things. If you are only making one style of music and you know sort of plugin combinations that you like, you can set things up like that in advance just to save you the time. Personally, when I make music for fun, I like to start completely blank canvas so that, my mind won't be kind of tied down. I can really think freely without being kind of constrained to whatever I've dropped in the template. That's a personal preference, not something you actually have to follow along with, and that is going to wrap up our discussion on templates in Bitwig Studio 1.2. On to number 7, the oscilloscope. Anyone who watched my videos from the beginning, you know how much I was complaining about the Smexoscope not being able to load in like Intel Max, I guess is the reason why it won't work. So Bitwig has been nice enough to provide us with an oscilloscope. When you're making music, you're not going to really be using an oscilloscope, but if you're a music teacher or you're brand new to making music in like synthesis, for example, an oscilloscope is, you know, insanely helpful because it really can illustrate a lot of points that you want to show people, but you can't. So that is the whole purpose of having something like this. I'm not going to go through all of like this trigger stuff. Really what we have here is the ability to like set the left and right channel like independent. Because this is like mono, you're not going to see a difference. But if I was to go in here and like change the volume on one, you can see even though they're doing the same thing. But if I link them, they'll just snap into place. But if you have something stereo and you want to see the difference, pretty cool little feature there. I'm just going to go ahead and turn that to off right now. You can even go in external in. So you could actually say like, okay, here's my kick drum pattern. And then for whatever reason, also be able to see the piano on a different track if you wanted to do that. But the reason I might use the oscilloscope would be for something like explaining FM synthesis to people. So if you have a subwoofer, I encourage you to turn it off. If for some reason I forget to turn off the audio here, I'm going to go down to below like an audio rate here. And I'm going to pull the scaling back and increase this a little bit. So you'd be able to see something like, for example, if we are going to go ahead and like have operator 2 work onto operator 1 in an FM configuration, we could see the way that it changes the waveform into something like a square wave, right? Something really clean, something obvious, as compared to if we chose some sort of like random interval here. Let's do something like this. And then decided to go in there and add this in. You'll see how that waveform looks quite nasty and confusing. So that would be just a really simple example of when I'd use the oscilloscope. But Bitwig Studio has also gone ahead and taken that one step further by adding in visual displays for all of their dynamic devices as well. Now, for whatever reason, I guess because when you search a drum loop, these Beatport drum loops are the first thing that comes up. These are already really fully processed sounds already. You're not going to be going in and using one of these and then like putting a compressor on it or anything like that, because they've already been kind of designed to sound as good as they can right out of the box. But just for the sake of example, you can see that we now have visual display of how your gain reduction is working. So if you're, and you can freeze it too if you don't want to actually see it. So if you're brand new to making music or you're teaching somebody, you're going to want to encourage them to have this on so they can actually see what is going on inside of the signal as far as gain reduction is concerned. Or if you're like adjusting attack and release controls. You could have that set up. And in fact, it does work the opposite way as well if you're working with, low level compression. You can see the way that this is going to rise. And then one really cool thing you can do if you're a geek like me is you can actually put in the exact same settings for the compressor and the dynamics and actually get like a visual representation of the difference in how like these release characteristics are working. A big part of distinguishing compressors one from the other, particularly vintage compressors, it's not just the harmonic distortion characteristics, it's also in the attack, the release controls, and how the knee is actually programmed or specifically designed, engineered within those compressors. So that's something you can check out for fun and see kind of the difference there when you put the same settings in. It's kind of cool. Last but not least, well, we have two more to go. We have the peak limiter here. Okay, pretty straightforward, but one cool thing about this visual display is you can see what happens when you kind of push things too hard and try to have too fast of a release. you can hear the distortion, and in a way you can also literally see it down here. So I found that to be kind of cool. You can also watch and see just how hard you're crushing your signal, so it's a useful visual display there as well. The other visual display that we have is with the Transient Control here. And this one's also really a very cool display. You can definitely explore it on your own, but if I go through here, so we're doing nothing to the signal right now, but watch what's going to happen down here in this lower display. You can see how we're impacting the attack. Maybe we want to bring it down. So we'll do something like that. We can see the curve, and then maybe we want to add some gain to the release. Have it almost instant or a little bit slower. So something like that is pretty cool, and you can actually visually see what's happening with your transient control, which, you know, is really just like a super, super fast kind of, you know, two super fast compressors working together. Well, that's not really what it is, but for sake of the visual explanation, you should have an idea of what's going on, and you can obviously hear the difference before and after. Let's see, item number 8 on our list, which is Aftertouch Modulation. Okay, so that just means if you have a keyboard controller that allows for polyphonic aftertouch, aka they call it channel pressure here, you can set that up. So you see that I've set it up to a few different places. All right, and I have my little MIDI keyboard next to me, and here's what we can do with it. If I solo this guy out and go up. So I've always had this problem. It might just be my keyboard, but anytime I've tried to set anything up with the aftertouch, it always gives me that kind of clicky effect. So you could go in here, for example, and like just drop a note on here, and we could go in here to the MIDI and choose channel pressure and just do something like this. But you can hear we always kind of get that sort of clicky effect. So I'm not sure what's up with that. Might just be on my end. But it is cool if you know how to play with Aftertouch much better than I know how to play with it, because you might be able to get some cool effects. And if you have something like a delay, the little click, number one, might sound cool in the context of what you have going on. Or number two, it could be masked by everything else that's happening in your track. So, oops, wrong side. All right, on to item number 9. This might have been something that's been available for a long time, and I've just never really noticed it. But one cool thing you can do is on any given track, you can actually select multiple effects that you have. So for example, we could select this dynamics, this compressor, and this peak limiter all at once, and we could either turn them all on or turn them all off. Or, you know, if we just want to take one and then this top one, we could turn that on, we could turn that off. So that might be new. It might have been around from the beginning, but I think that's come along with the device inspector panel. The one thing you can't do, which would be really cool, is be able to click across. So choose different plugins on different channels and turn them all off together. Maybe they'll have that in the future. I think that would be super, super handy. But for now, that's not available. One other thing you can do, this might have been available from the beginning, is if you are mixing and you're using mostly plugins and nothing else, is you can actually click on the specific plugin itself and have that menu pop up for you. So if you're using like the big meters, you don't have to worry about having to bring up the panel down here and then open up your plugin from that window. You can just open up your plugin straight from here. That might have been something that's been around from the beginning. It's nothing I've ever really noticed or thought about. So that's useful, time-saving device. And one other thing that's a time-saving device I didn't mention before is you can clear all of your meters by holding the shift key and then just clicking on one of them. So you can see that we have minus 13.5, minus 13.5, minus 23.6. Normally, if I just click on one, it will refresh that 1 meter. But if I click select, we'll be able to watch that it clears all of them together. So there are instances where that becomes useful if you're having like clipping problems and you're trying to fix it and you need to clear all your meters out again really fast. You can do that, like have the master clear as well as the actual track itself. So something to keep in mind, just, a short little tip that has probably been, a part of the program from the beginning, but thought I'd share it regardless. On to number 10, you'll find that some of the frequency devices inside of Bitwig Studio, things like the filter and the EQ and maybe like the ring modulator and the frequency shifter, I'm not 100% sure. They now come with this new little display here, which is converting your frequency to note. How useful is that? Well, I can think of one case where it's useful, and that is if you're trying to like find the fundamental frequency of a kick drum, or you want to try to hype that fundamental frequency and keep it in tune, in key with everything else that you have going on. The higher you go, of course, because of how the frequency numbers work, the harder it's going to be to lock this into anything. You can see we did hit, I think, the F7 we can hit right on, but it's kind of hard to hit things perfectly. Lower down here, because, the numbers are a lot closer together, you can actually get to the note itself pretty easily. Like you can see I can hit most of them here if I'm going down. You can see that. So that's helpful. How helpful is it really going to be? I'm not sure. I guess enough people requested it. Personally, I'd always say use your ears versus using a readout like that. But it is there now if you want something to give you a little bit of that feedback, converting the frequency to the note. So kind of cool. Not sure how useful it's going to be for everybody, but you never know. Somebody that might make or break a track for them. So it's a cool feature nonetheless. On to number 11, and in my opinion, this one's kind of a biggie. It's a improvement to the multi-sample mode inside of Bitwig Studio's sampler. I never really read about this, but all right, on to number 11, and in my opinion, this is a real biggie, and it's not something that they've really advertised, but it actually will get me using the Bitwig sampler when in the past I rarely would, because of this one glitch that I personally would always seem to encounter, which is if you would go and drag and drop a sample in here, convert this thing into multi-sample mode, and then go into edit the multi-sample, and you'd want to, like, for example, add in something different. Like, let's say we want this to go over like the C3 up to the C4 range. If I would go and try to drag a new clip in, it would always seem to crash on me every time I would do this. They've made this a heck of a lot easier now to work with. So you could now kind of bring this in like so. The velocity layers have always worked the same way, but in the past you'd have to have like had everything selected before bringing it in, and now you can very easily just bring things in manually, go to different folders, find what you're looking for, and then be able to bring things in wherever you want it. So that has become, that one's been key tracked for some reason. So you can now go in here very easily and add in multi-samples with a lot less of a headache, a lot less crashes is what I'm going to say, at least from the little bit that I've been working with it. So I'm quite happy about that. There's still a lot of like sonic things they could do to improve this. You can't layer things inside of the sampler. You can do velocity layers, but you can't actually layer two sounds on top of each other. Hopefully that's something they'll look to improve in the future. But for now, it's become much more of a usable instrument than it was in the past when I've tried to do something like that and it wouldn't work. So check that out. Maybe you weren't having problems before. I know I was, and for me that is a monster update. That is a big help, at least to me. All right, on to one of the new devices, and that new device is the Delay 4. All right, so this is like a tap delay. We will no longer have to use like multi-tap 4, multi-tap 6 because Bitwig Studio has given us one built in. So it's very simple the way this thing works. This is the sound we're going to use. Godavari. All right, so we can bring this in.
Godavari.
Right now, this is going at 1/16th note. You can pretty much set any division you want in here, or you can actually turn this off and run it into like a free time type sort of a mode. So let's just set something up here quickly. We'll do like 8, 12, and I don't know, 16. So a hold note. We'll set this one to be off to the left. We'll set this one to be off to the right, and then we'll have this one stay in the center. We'll bring all of these in like so.
Godavari.
So you can hear it like so. And so what this does is it gives you exact precision over how many delay lines that you have running. You can actually run these in for additional feedback if you want. So if we actually want number 1 to like feed back on itself, have number 2 be feeding back into number 1.
Godavari. Godavari.
You'll see how 1 is lingering there longer. So you can set up feedbacks like that and experiment with that to your heart's content. Personally, I probably wouldn't do that because the whole reason I'm using a multi-tap delay is so I have precision control over it. If you're wondering, like, why can't I run something like longer than a full note, you absolutely can. All you have to do is just go with the delay 1 and drop that into the input effects, put that mix up to 100, 0 feedback, and then I could add a whole note, or I could add a half note, whatever I want. So let's say that I want to add a whole note, and you'll hear how long this takes to get to the delay now.
Godavari. Godavari.
As opposed to
Godavari.
right? And the other thing you can do is you can actually stack these up on top of each other. So if you need like an 8-tap delay, which I'm not sure why you would, you can actually run a delay 4 into another delay 4. And then, just do that sort of delay trick I was showing you. Put a delay 1 into any of these if you need other timings. And of course, if you want to do it in like a freeform mode, you can go in your time with seconds. So where this is really usable typically is like at the end of a vocal phrase. And what you'll do is you'll just like send it all right at that moment. You can modulate you can automate the on off, but a lot of times that gives you like weird clicks and pops. In the context of a full arrangement, sometimes it's not a big deal. Sometimes it is, so it's something you'll just have to experiment with. But if it was me and I just wanted to get that last phrase, what I would do is I would go in here and I would set up
Godavari. Godavari.
something like this.
Godavari. 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 Godavari.
And obviously you can add in feedback effects if you want. You can add an effect to the entire chain. So like maybe we want to put in like a reverb here. We could do that.
Godavari. Godavari.
And then you can also, coming in, manipulate the sound in as many ways as you want. So this is like really neat. This is what sets this thing apart from any other kind of multi-tap I've ever seen, is the fact that we can individually process each of these lines that are coming in. So cool. In sort of like a practical context, how much are you going to use this? I'm not sure. You could do some things like with, let's see, do I actually have it on here right now? What is it called? With the proximity, like you could play with this on all 3 and pretend like each one is getting further and further back in the spectrum. You could do something like that. But actually, you know what? That's going to be too confusing of an example. So instead, what I'll do is I'll just add different effects in here. We're not going to get into all of this sort of acoustics and nonsense. So we could add like a blur onto the first one. We could add like a comb onto the second one. And add like a flanger onto the third one.
Godavari,
That's pretty cool.
Godavari, 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 Godavari.
So yeah, obviously I'm not coming up with the best result right now, but you can clearly get some really, really interesting delay lines out of this. And to me, I'm so happy they added in something like this. I never thought they would put something like this into the program, but from both a creative standpoint and also from a practical standpoint with like delay throws and that sort of a thing, so useful, so helpful. It means you don't have to use the delay too and try to, hit your feedback just right, or you don't have to like bounce things out and line it up with time. You can use this delay 4 instead. So very happy about this one. Super cool effect. No more needs to be said. All right, on to number 13, which is a added sidechain into the ring mod. So that may not seem like much, but you're going to realize how powerful this is very quickly. We've been holding off on this new browser panel thing because personally it's not something that I've gotten used to at all as of yet. We'll talk about that at the end, but for now, let's go ahead and set this up. I'm going to put a test tone on here. All right, this is probably going to be pretty annoying. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to add on the ring mod. And now inside of the ring mod, we actually have a sidechain that we can set up. So right now it's just using one of these oscillators. So this wouldn't be very exciting.
Go, go.
It's just doing what a ring mod does. But what I can do is I could actually set the sidechain to something whose frequency varies dramatically. So something like this vocal line would be perfect example of this. I could go on here and I could go to the vocal, and I'm actually going to choose it pre so that I can mute it. And now listen to what happens here.
Godavari, Godavari.
So you almost are getting like a vocoder style effect in here. And then if you go and you affect this even further, you can get some like really, really kind of cool results out of this. Like I could put on maybe like a distortion. I could put on like a reverb. And then if I'm lacking in any kind of frequency range on this thing, I could actually put a resonator bank on this. This is going to be kind of crazy. I'm not sure what this is going to sound like. Let's see what we can get out of this.
Godavari, 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 Godavari.
What else do I want? Give me something interesting. Could put another ring mod actually on this afterwards. I'm not going to do that though. Let's see. Maybe we'll just use a chorus. That's simple enough.
Godavari, 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 Godavari.
So you can actually like hit some of these like resonant frequencies as it's going across this.
Godavari, 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 Godavari.
And I think you all know what's coming next, don't you? I'm going to go and add an LFO mod at the beginning of this thing. Put my test tone in there. And go ahead and sync this to...
Godavari, 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 Godavari.
something like that. Okay, so a lot you can do with this. It seems like a very small thing, but if you are creative with it, yeah, a lot of possibilities from a sonic standpoint. All right, last but not least, this is number 14. We have the new browser. And the browser, for me personally, is going to be something that takes a few weeks to get used to. And I don't think it's a bad change. I think it's a good change. I really do, but it's going to take some time. I'm not the sort of person who uses the keyboard a lot to like search for things. If you ever watch my videos, you notice I pretty much always click here and find what I'm looking for. And from going through this tutorial, I've been going over to the right, choosing Bitwig, and searching for the device I want. Now, that's not really possible. Every time you click this plus, you're going to be brought up to the new browser where you then have to search for what you're looking for. And you really need to be aware of all of these different tabs up here because, like, let's say I'm looking to add in the acoustic piano. If I go in here and search for piano, I'm getting nothing. I'm getting nothing because there is no such thing as piano in devices, but there is the piano in the multi-samples. So I'd have to go over, click on multi-samples, choose acoustic piano, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and favorite this right now. Now, when it loads in, it's not officially loaded in until you click OK. We have the preview button enabled, which means I can play as compared to not being able to play and not being able to see anything. And then once I click OK, it will actually bring it in. All right, so I'll click OK. Now, if I want to go in and load something and I search for piano, again, I'm not seeing anything, even though I just added it to my favorites. I have to go back to the multi-samples and I'll see it again like so. So I'm a little bit confused how this is all working, to be honest with you. It's going to take some time to get used to. That's all I can really say about it. It is useful, don't get me wrong. Like, for example, if I'm back here at my devices and I'm looking for, I don't know, like the Code Red EQ, I could just start searching code and I'd be able to find that very quickly if that's what I need. Now, this is very new to me, this whole idea of a browser like this. So I can't say that I've really gotten the hang of it, but there are some useful features to this. For example, if we go in here and we want to add on the reverb, I can search reverb, I'll get that reverb, and now with this preview enabled, I could actually go to presets, and it's going to have the presets for the reverb, and if I'm playing, I can actually go through these, and I can make adjustments even. And one cool thing about this is you can actually drag it out and have it kind of run in freeform. So if you want it to be smaller, you can collapse the whole thing as well. So I do think there are some useful parts to this. It just takes time, right? So if you're opening up Bitwig, I didn't spend a lot of time with the beta, as I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So once you get used to this, once you get used to working around it, I think it will be really helpful. For now, I'm not used to it, which is why I didn't really show it to you at all until the very end of the video. So that, for the most part, is what is new in version 1.2. I apologize for kind of ranting a lot at you, but hopefully you've gotten something out of this. Again, leave comments about other things you've discovered. I know they spend a lot of time working with Midi integration, and that's not something I do a whole lot of, so leave comments about that or anything else that you have discovered with 1.2. Thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good one.